De'Von Achane had 50 points in week 3. So let's check to see where he was in the most helpful fantasy players list. All right, so he's just behind Tyler Higbee.
Yeah, feeling good on a Wednesday.
Just behind Tyler Higbee. Hope you all are doing good for a Wednesday. My name is Byron Cobalt from byron-cobalt.com, and this is the Fantasy Games 1 Week 3 recap. Fantasy Games 1 is a metric that quantifies players' impact on your fantasy team. If you want to know how Fantasy Games 1 is calculated, I got a video up here you can go check out. Week 3 had more chirping dolphins than in Aaron Rodgers' meditation tape. Now, before we get into that, just a quick aside about all that chirping on Reddit from my post last week. I knew it was a bold claim to say Ja'Marr Chase was the most talented wide receiver in the NFL. But to be honest, I underestimated the blowback. If you want to hear my thoughts on that, stick around to the end of the video. De'Von Achane scored about 50 points in most scoring systems in week 3. But here's the thing. He wasn't started almost at all. If you go to yahoo.com, his percent started number was 0, which means that at least rounds to 0. That means that even though he's scoring 50 points, he's probably doing it on your bench. Those points scored on your bench don't matter. How many fantasy games one did De'Von Achane actually earn in week 3? Well, if you actually take points scored number, if he were in your starting lineup, he increased your chances of winning from 50%, all things being equal, up to 98%. Once you consider his percent started number, which is at most 0.49%, given that it rounds down to 0, that leaves a fantasy games one number of 0.002352, which puts him at 71st, right after Tyler Higbee and right ahead of Dameon Pierce, who were average, but at least were played. So what are we looking at for De'Von Achane here? Is there a lot to pull from this? I mean, I think everyone understands that a player scoring a ton of points on your bench is not as useful as playing it in your starting lineup. But when we look back at who the best players were this year, a lot of people still consider that 50 points to be part of De'Von Achane's total for the year. I might say he's one of the best running backs. Being a great running back in a way that's completely unpredictable is not as useful as being a great running back in a way that's predictable. And that's true for all fantasy players. So if you're looking back at 2023 and you want to get a better measure of how different players helped fantasy teams, Fantasy Games 1 is going to be better because it's going to remember that these 50 points came on your JV squads. Hear about this player that went off on the JV team and there are like 3 fans there. And yeah, this kind of reminds me of that. We will see if this is the start of a great season for De'Von Achane, or if now that people are going to start putting him in their starting lineups, he's just going to be below average, and as a result, will be a net negative to your fantasy team. If that happens, even Flipper won't be able to save all the drowning fantasy managers. Let's go recap week 3. Week 3's number 1 player in Fantasy Games 1 for the second week in a row was Keenan Allen. Now with Mike Williams hurt again, he's got, I mean, to be honest, Keenan Allen gets hurt a decent amount too, but he's got open highway in front of him to put together a career year. There's a chance that 2023 will be to Keenan Allen's career the way Snakes on a Plane was to Kenan Thompson's career. I don't know what I expected to be the top movies on Kenan Thompson's Rotten Tomatoes meter, but pleasantly surprised that it was Snakes on a Plane. Well, at least was number 2. Almost tied with Keenan Allen was Davante Adams. Remember that Davante Adams could be playing with, I guess, Jordan Love at this point. I don't know if that would be better. Clearly has a lot of talent. He would have something to say about my post from last week. Third on the list is Raheem Mostert. Raheem Mostert was the running back in the Dolphins backfield that actually helped a lot of fantasy managers. He was started 84% of the time. The Yahoo Raw percent started data showed 78% of the time. But given where expert rankings fell, most serious fantasy managers are more likely to start him. So good job, everyone. Good job, fantasy experts, for seeing this coming, at least for Raheem Mostert. No one saw this coming for De'Von Achane. While it wasn't George Kittle's week to have his semi-annual good game, it may be Kenneth Walker's week to have a semi-annual good game. He had 2 games last year where he scored over 20 points, and that was it. He's a bit of a boomer bust player, but a lot of volume went over to Zach Charbonnet. I'd like to thank Ja'Marr Chase for at least not sucking this week. We look at our stack rankings, who the biggest stackers were.
Welcome to the Stackers Union, kid.
Mahomes and Kelsey both on the top 15 here for the week, but the Mahomes and Kelsey stack was only the 3rd best of the week after Herbert and Allen and Tua and Tyreek. Maybe we do need to start referring to Herbert and Allen by their first names, but Justin and Keenan, I don't think anyone would really know who you're talking about. But Tua and Tyreek, we know. It's a great week for stacks, actually. I think a few people actually do have those stacks. Let's see who lost you the week. Let's talk about Drake London for a minute. I mean, who would have known that Desmond Ridder would be a less than prolific quarterback for the Falcons? Who could have seen that coming? I don't know. Getting painful with Drake London. He's down to 61% started. He might drop down. Well, he's probably going to drop down a little bit next week. We'll start seeing bye weeks. His number might pick up a little bit. The passes have to go to someone for the Falcons. Speaking of having to give the ball to someone, the Rams keep giving the ball to Kyren Williams, although he did not have as great of a week. Sign that they will start making a change there, or maybe Kyren Williams' volume is all you really care about. I'm on the Kyren Williams bandwagon. It seems like the bandwagon's slowing down a bit, but I don't see the Zach Evans bandwagon picking up speed, so maybe we're okay. When Andre Stevenson evolved into Ramondre Stevenson, he stopped leveling up as fast, and maybe that's a problem because he's got another rough week in there. That's a Pokemon joke. I don't know how many people are going to get that. I'll make it. I'll give it a shot. The Dallas defense actually has a bad week, which cancels out a little bit of their week 1 and week 2. See if that means Dallas Goedert had actually a good week to cancel it out. I don't know. Let's see. No, he did not. It appears that T. Higgins had to be sacrificed so that Jamar Chase could demonstrate his talent. Sorry, T. Higgins. Meanwhile, Derrick Henry. Tell you how the tides have turned.
Well, now that we know you think the tables are turning, we know you thought there were unturned tables.
We might be talking about the Terminator Genesis phase of Terminator's career. Honestly, 2021, biggest thing I remember from that year and starting the Fantasy Games 1 column is how dominant Derrick Henry was for the first half of the season. And now, it's not the same. He's not as old as Arnold at this point, but I've never seen Terminator Genesis. I don't think that I want to, though. Let's go over to the Junior Varsity All-Stars. These are the players that have done the best on your bench. Unsurprisingly, De'Von Achane is number 1 on the list. Because De'Von Achane had a 0% started number, all of his potential fantasy games won were on the bench, which is why his number's at 0.48, which I would not be surprised if that becomes the highest number ever for fantasy games 1. I mean, that's going to be tough to beat. A player that's started by nobody scores 50 points. That's not going to happen a lot. We might be looking back as this is the greatest JV game of all time. Adam Thielen on here. It's nice to see Adam Thielen's name pop up again, although we did it with Andy Dalton at quarterback. It's actually started 14% of the time. I feel bad if you were starting Adam Thielen, but nice job. I feel especially bad if you were stuck starting the Andy Dalton and Adam Thielen stack, but it turned out well for you. No one really started Andy Dalton, except maybe in a Superflex league. I actually did start him in a league, but I didn't have Adam Thielen. Tank Dell with 8% started in a good week. Tank Dell is known for making a list kind of like Tom Brady did of all the players at his position drafted ahead of him. I don't know why all players don't just do that now, right? Like, why would you not do that? Bring attention, put some positive pressure behind you, makes you come across as competitive. I'm pretty sure people think Tank Dell is going to be better than maybe he is because he made that list. So if I were advising an NFL rookie, I would say, hey, make a list of the guys drafted ahead of you. Just write it down. Just put it on your wall. It'll be behind you for Zoom interviews or something like that. And that's it for week 3. Let's go check out the leaderboards to see how everyone's stacking up for the season so far.
I'll be back.
What?
The Cooper Cup Golden Barrel MVP leaderboard has Tyreek Hill still at number 1. Tyreek Hill with another great week in week 3. Seemingly could have been even better given how well the Dolphins did. Man, I did not expect to see that number. I actually thought I was watching a college game. It's 70. They actually scored 70 points with 8 minutes left in the fourth quarter. Well, they easily could have scored 80. They actually could have scored 73 if they kicked that field goal at the end of the game. There's a chance that Mike McDaniel is a genius, and it's unfortunate as I just got over we already have another genius coach in the division, and we have for 25 years or so now. Almost. Oh, man. Keenan Allen, number 2 in the MVP leaderboard. Actually, a similar mix of games as Tyreek Hill. If you had both of them, you've had a great year so far. Justin Jefferson and Christian McCaffrey have been consistent as so far. If you're drafting today, I would understand if they were still the first and second pick. Not a lot of consistency looking down the list. No other player had 0.1 fantasy games won in all 3 games this year. Also kind of crazy that Aaron Jones and Austin Eckler are still on the MVP leaderboard having only played 1 game. I think that says something about what this season has been like so far. I really want to know what happened to Dallas, though. Let's move on over to the Brady Wedding Ring season least valuable player leaderboard. This appears to be just backup running back alley here. A.J. Dillon, despite no Aaron Jones, hasn't done much. Dalvin Cook, despite not a ton of work with Breece Hall, hasn't done much. Joshua Kelly, despite no Austin Eckler for 2 weeks, hasn't done much. I don't know what to make of that. We were talking before about who's going to get the passes for Atlanta. It does not look like it's going to be Kyle Pitts. Fast forward 10 years from now, we're probably going to have the same conversations about Kyle Pitts. He's the most talented tight end in football. I'm not going to. As far as the poster boys of Fantasy Games 1 for 2023, I called out Justin Fields and Trevor Lawrence in my kickoff video, and they have not been representing well. They haven't been as bad as Najee Harris and Joe Burrow. In a hole in the ground lived Joe Burrow owners. Plate of Jonathan Taylor promise, return on investment leaderboard. This is the MVP list, but adjusts for draft capital. Raises the bar if you're a high draft pick, lowers the bar if you're a low draft pick. Keenan Allen swaps into the top spot because he was a later pick than Tyreek. Still some kickers on the board here. I miss Cameron Dicker, though. I feel like I didn't get enough jokes in there. And in the Allen Robinson Bear Pelt season DOI leaderboard, DOI being disappearance of investment.
And it's gone.
Starting to look like Josh Jacobs. Anyone that was riding Josh Jacobs into 2023 is dying right now. I'm just referring back to the Matthew Berry, Josh Jacobs ride or die thing from 3 years ago. And I'll tell you what, I don't envy anyone that's in the boat of having to decide whether or not to start Joe Burrow or any player, any of their studs that are fighting injuries. It's one of the more difficult decisions to make in fantasy, especially when it's a Monday night game. Although it seemed like almost everybody that had Joe Burrow was able to pick up Matthew Stafford this past week, and that actually ended up being the correct start. Hopefully better days are ahead for Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and everyone else that I have staked my reputation to. If you were to had a time machine and you could look and see how players are doing after week 3, the best team you could have drafted to start 2023 was Tyreek Hill, Devontae Adams, Aaron Jones, Keenan Allen, Justin Herbert, James Cook, Mike Evans, Tua, Raheem Mostert, and Dawson Knox, because you need to have a tight end, and Hawkinson wasn't good enough to draft over Keenan Allen. If you had that team, that would have been pretty absurd. I wonder if there are any teams that look like that out there. That's it for week 3. Now, quick aside on all that controversy for week 2. So some of you may know, in addition to these videos, I have a blog, and I cross-post that blog largely over on Reddit. Get a lot of conversation around the metric and some of the observations for the week. I like to make it interesting. I made it a little bit too interesting this past week because, man, there were not a lot of people that were happy with my claim that Jamar Chase was the most talented receiver, especially compared to Justin Jefferson. Now, to be fair, I didn't put together a huge case. I didn't use Fantasy Games 1 to make the argument. I basically said that sufficient measure to establish Jamar Chase is more talented is where he was drafted, given how recent it was, how young they are. Clearly, not everyone agrees with that. What am I going to do about this? Well, I still believe this. There were some good arguments made, but not anything that would change my mind. I'm going to put together a bigger case on this later. We need something to talk about in the offseason, so this isn't over. The Jamar Chase versus Justin Jefferson discussion will continue. In case your players have not been fulfilling their talent, just remember, we're all going down in this fantasy football ship together. It's been a privilege and an honor. Good luck in week 4.
Right, that's it then.
Goodbye, Ollie. Good luck.
Goodbye, Bolly.
Take a turn around the baby, load the first tunnel until the deck.